You know that person who seemed so into you then suddenly pulled away, leaving you confused and hurt. Maybe they ghosted after a minor conflict. Maybe they ended things out of nowhere, citing vague reasons. Maybe they just disappeared emotionally while still being physically present. Now, here's what most people don't know while you're sitting there wondering what you did wrong. There's a good chance they're in their own private hell, convinced they screwed everything up. But instead of reaching out, apologizing, or trying to fix it, they disappear even further. Welcome to the paradox of the avoidant attachment style. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on what actually happens in an avoidant's mind when they think they've ruined a good thing. And trust me, the truth is far more complicated than they just don't care. What you're about to discover will completely change how you understand avoidant behavior. Whether you identify with this attachment style yourself, or you've been on the receiving end of their confusing push-pull dynamics, we're going to explore 6 crucial insights that reveal the internal battle raging, their calm exterior, the shame spirals they experience in silence, and the protective mechanisms that keep them trapped in cycles of regret and isolation. This isn't about excusing hurtful behavior or asking anyone to tolerate emotional unavailability, but about understanding the psychological mechanisms that drive these patterns so that healing and growth become possible. Let's dive in. Picture this: an avoidant just had a disagreement. Maybe they shut down during a conversation about the future. Maybe they canceled plans last minute because things were getting too serious. Maybe they said something dismissive that clearly hurt their partner. From the outside, they seem fine, unbothered, maybe even relieved. But inside, there's a war happening. Here's the first truth nobody talks about: avoidants are absolutely brutal to themselves when they think they've messed up. While anxious types might blow up your phone seeking reassurance, avoidants go completely internal. They replay the situation obsessively, analyzing every word they said, every reaction they had. And here's the kicker: they usually conclude that they're fundamentally broken. The self-talk becomes vicious and relentless, a constant stream of "did again," "I hurt someone who cared about me," "I'm just like I've always been, incapable of doing relationships right." This isn't just guilt about a specific action or regret over words spoken in the heat of the moment. It's existential shame, the kind that confirms their deepest fear that they're too damaged for real connection, that something essential is missing from their emotional makeup, that they'll never be capable of sustaining healthy intimacy. But do they tell anyone this? Absolutely not, because admitting they care enough to feel bad would make them vulnerable. And vulnerability is the enemy their nervous system has been programmed to avoid at all costs. So they suffer in silence, appearing cold and detached, while internally they're experiencing a level of self-condemnation that would shock anyone who witnessed it. The tragedy is that this silent spiral reinforces their isolation, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where their fear of being fundamentally flawed prevents them from seeking the connection and reassurance that could challenge that belief. They become convinced that sharing these feelings would burden others or reveal their inadequacy, so they lock it all away, presenting a facade of indifference while drowning in shame. This pattern often started in childhood, when expressing emotional needs led to dismissal, ridicule, or punishment, teaching them that their feelings were problems to be hidden rather than signals to be honored. Now let's talk about timing, because this is where it gets really messy and where most people completely misunderstand avoidant behavior. In the moment of conflict or emotional intensity, an avoidance system goes into full deactivation mode, their nervous system literally screaming, "Threat detected," with all the urgency of a fire alarm. Intimacy feels like suffocation, emotions feel like chaos, and the only solution their brain offers is to create distance immediately. So they do exactly that. They pull back, shut down, or leave, often without adequate explanation or consideration for their partner's confusion and pain. And initially, they feel relief, their system calms down, and they can breathe again, the overwhelming sensation subsiding into familiar numbness. But then, usually days or even weeks later, when the immediate threat has passed, the regret hits hard like a delayed earthquake after shock. Suddenly, they're alone with their thoughts. The perceived threat is gone, but so is the person. And now they start remembering all the good parts, the connection they felt, the laughter they shared, the safety they actually experienced before their fear kicked in and hijacked their response. This is the cruel irony that defines avoidant attachment. They often want the relationship most when it's already over, when the distance they created to feel safe has robbed them of the very connection they actually craved. But here's where they get stuck in a secondary trap, because that same deactivation system, that person away, is now telling them, don't go back. You'll just hurt them again. You'll just prove you can't do this. You're fundamentally incapable of sustaining intimacy. So they stay away, not because they don't care, but because they care enough to believe the other person is better off without them, a twisted form of self-sacrifice born from deep unworthiness. This cycle can repeat endlessly. Closeness triggers fear, fear triggers distance, distance triggers regret, regret triggers shame, and shame reinforces the belief that they should stay away. Breaking this cycle requires recognizing that the fear response in the moment and the regret that follows are both valid experiences, but neither tells the complete truth about their capacity for connection. Let's get real for a second about the core belief system driving this behavior. Avoidants don't just think they made a mistake in how they handled a situation. They think they're the mistake, that their very existence in someone's emotional life is ultimately damaging. When they've pushed someone away, there's this narrative that starts playing on repeat of, and if I tried to fix this, I'd just do it again. I'd get scared again. When things got too close, I'd hurt them again when my defenses kicked in. So what's the point of trying? This isn't logical thinking that can be reasoned away with rational arguments. It's trauma-based thinking rooted in early relational experiences that shape their entire worldview. Most avoidants develop this attachment style because at some point in their formative years, their emotional needs were consistently dismissed, punished, or ignored by the very people who were supposed to provide safety and attunement. They learned through painful repetition that depending on people equals pain, that showing you care equals rejection, that vulnerability is dangerous rather than connecting. So when they think they've screwed up a relationship, it's not just about that specific situation or conflict. It's confirmation of a story they've believed their whole life, a narrative that says, I'm not built for this, I'm not capable of being what someone needs. I'm fundamentally defective in my ability to love and be loved. And the most heartbreaking part is that they genuinely believe they're protecting you by staying away, that their absence is a gift rather than an abandonment. They see themselves as toxic or broken, convinced that anyone who gets close will eventually discover their inadequacy and leave anyway. So why put both parties through that inevitable pain? This belief is so deeply embedded that even evidence to the contrary, partners who express love, relationships that were actually working well, gets filtered through this lens of fundamental unworthiness. They'll rewrite history to match their belief, focusing on moments of disconnection while minimizing or dismissing moments of genuine intimacy and joy. Here's where we need to decode some avoidant behavior, because what you see on the surface is almost never what's happening underneath, and misinterpreting these signals can lead to devastating misunderstandings. After an avoidant thinks they've ruined things, you might notice they start dating someone new immediately, sometimes within days of ending a significant relationship. You might see them posting on social media looking completely unbothered, smiling in photos, appearing to live their best life. They might throw themselves into work, hobbies, or fitness obsessively, suddenly training for a marathon or taking on huge projects. They might seem colder and more distant than ever when you accidentally run into them, barely making eye contact or offering only polite pleasantries. Anxious types see this and think, see, they never cared, I meant nothing, they've already replaced me, and moved on without a second thought. But attachment research tells us something radically different about what's actually happening. This is protest behavior, the avoidance way of desperately trying to convince both themselves and the world, I can handle this, I don't need anyone, I'm fine alone, I'm thriving actually. It's armor, not truth, performance, not reality. The person they're dating is probably emotionally unavailable themselves, or represents only surface level connection, someone who won't trigger their deeper attachment wounds or require real vulnerability. These rebound relationships often feel safe precisely because they lack depth and intimacy that activated their fear in the previous relationship. The social media posts are carefully curated proof that they're okay, meticulously selected to project an image of someone unbothered and moving forward, both to convince you and, more importantly, to convince themselves the obsessive productivity is a distraction from the feelings they're desperately trying to avoid, a way to fill every moment so there's no space for the grief, regret, or longing to surface. It's not indifference to what they lost, it's protection on steroids, a full-scale defense operation against feeling the pain of what actually happened. Understanding this doesn't mean you should wait around or tolerate poor treatment, but it does mean recognizing that their apparent ease in moving on is often the opposite of what they're actually experiencing internally. Now, here's a phenomenon that keeps avoidants stuck in limbo indefinitely, unable to move forward or back the fantasy of the perfect reconciliation that plays out endlessly in their imagination. In their mind, they rehearse it constantly, sometimes multiple times per day, crafting and revising the perfect words, the perfect timing, the perfect way to explain themselves without being too vulnerable or too distant. They imagine finally being able to articulate what happened with clarity and emotional intelligence. I got scared. I shut down. It wasn't about you or anything you did. I want to try again, and I'm willing to work on this. They visualize the conversation going well. Imagine being understood and forgiven. Picture a reunion that validates both their feelings and their partners. But here's the trap that keeps this fantasy from becoming reality. They keep waiting for the right moment, that magical window when they feel completely ready, when they have it all figured out, when they can guarantee they won't mess up again or hurt their partner in the same ways. Spoiler alert, that moment never comes because growth doesn't work that way and certainty doesn't exist in relationships. So weeks turn into months. The imaginary perfect apology gets more elaborate and refined. The fantasy conversation becomes more polished and articulate, and the actual distance becomes harder to bridge with each passing day. Meanwhile, the other person has moved on emotionally, built up protective walls of their own, or stopped hoping that reconciliation is possible. The avoidant takes this as confirmation that they waited too long, that their hesitation proved they really did screw it up beyond repair, that they were right all along about being incapable of doing relationships correctly. This creates another layer of shame and regret, adding to the pile of evidence they've accumulated about their fundamental inadequacy. What they don't realize is that their partner didn't need a perfect apology. They needed any authentic reaching out, any genuine acknowledgement of what happened, any sign that the avoidant recognized the impact of their withdrawal. The perfect has truly become the enemy of the good, keeping them paralyzed in a fantasy that prevents real repair. But here's the truth that should give both avoidants and their partners hope, the possibility that can break through all these destructive patterns. There is a window where reconnection is possible, where repair can happen and relationships can be rebuilt on stronger foundations. You just have to understand how it works within the context of avoidant attachment, respecting their nervous system while also honoring legitimate needs for accountability and change. For avoidance, repair doesn't look like grand gestures, elaborate explanations, or emotional confessions that feel performative or overwhelming. It looks like simplicity and honesty, a text that says, "I've been thinking about how I handled things I know I shut down. I'm sorry." It looks like acknowledgement without over-explaining or justifying, "I got overwhelmed and I pulled away. That wasn't fair to you, and I understand if you're hurt." It looks like a low-pressure invitation that respects the other person's autonomy. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. No expectations or pressure, just genuine interest in hearing your perspective. The key is brevity, honesty, and giving the other person control over whether and how reconciliation happens. For partners of avoidance who find themselves in this situation, here's what actually helps create the conditions for possible reconnection. Don't chase them with constant messages or demands for explanation, but don't disappear completely either. Maintaining a presence that signals you're open without being desperate. Set clear boundaries about what you need moving forward, not as ultimatums, but as honest articulation of your own requirements for feeling safe and valued. Understand that their withdrawal wasn't a referendum on your worth or lovability, but a reflection of their own internal struggle with intimacy and vulnerability. Give them space to come back without punishment or "I told you so" energy, creating safety for them to be honest about what happened without fear of being shamed. Reconciliation with an avoidant requires patience and the understanding that their timeline doesn't match your timeline. And that's not rejection or lack of care. It's nervous system regulation happening at a different pace. Both parties need to recognize that healing avoidant attachment is possible, but requires consistent effort, self-awareness, and often professional support to rewire deeply ingrained patterns that have been decades in the making.